Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to part 3 of our interview with Brother Kris from Toronto and Brother Abdullah from New York. Abdullah, you wanted to provide an example from the Sirah, which kind of goes into what Kris was saying about
Yeah,
building sodalities?
yeah. Obviously, I'm not a theologian or a Islamic scientist or anything, but I feel like there's a specific example that something you reminded me of, Kris, when talking about this was when the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, when he was close to the end of his life. There's an authentic hadith that he specified that the next leader of the Muslims, whichever Khalifa comes next, needs to be from the tribe of Quraysh. Which a lot of the Muslims, they might read that and think that's strange because they came in thinking every I kept being preached to about how my race doesn't matter, about how I'm not basically we're all one. It's all based off faith and so on and so forth. So why would the Prophet say something like that? But you have to look at the wider cultural implication of the time, which was that the Prophet ﷺ, he recognized the reality that the Arabs at the time, the whole, basically the whole thing would have just fell apart if before he had died, he had just went, okay, I guess you guys should just figure it out based off virtue and whoever's the best Muslim, and then he passed away. What do you think would have happened if he had said that? But rather, he acknowledged that the dominant tribe at the time, not just the dominant tribe, but those who would have most likely led continued to lead the Quraysh and all the Arabs at the time, needed to be from among them, because he acknowledged, they weren't ready to transcend, their cultural identity to such an extent that they could just look at any leader who was a Muslim from just any place. So that was not like him declaring that that Quraysh was superior or anything like that, which some might interpret it that way, and I think they're absolutely wrong. But rather, he was making a very strategic political and cultural decision by doing that. Now, when you look at that today, it's like we're not saying, actually, no, scratch that. But basically, what I'm trying to say is like when you have like the Salafi or Wahhabi types who want to eliminate race entirely, or some Muslim communities who don't identify with that but do that unintentionally, it's like you're taking someone who already had some kind of cultural identity. They accept Islam, which is already this massive change in their life, and you're basically saying, oh, you must eliminate basically all these aspects of your culture in your history and who you are, and you just be this atom that's just floating in space that's not attached to anything. And that's like we went over this in the first segments. It's a very dangerous place to be in. So when someone hears what Kris is talking about, and instantly their brain defaults to the racism and isolation mindset, what really Kris is trying to get, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you need to base yourself in a kind of grounding which basically you protect yourself culturally and from an identity standpoint before you can get into the transcendent form groups with other kinds of groups, and then that way we can have one big nation again. So yes.
Also an aspect of sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's pretty much a specificity. I mean, you can't be efficient and get things done if everything's melded as one together and there's no lines, right? You need lines to organize units, cells or units of anything, whether it's economic or social. You need divisions that serve the greater body. So in this case, the greater body is being the Ummah, and it's described as a body, right? So it's pretty simple, but it doesn't make sense for the finger to be melded with the ear. It doesn't make any sense. There's separation, there's division, there's specificity. That way you can be more efficient in helping the whole. And that's the whole point of it. And that's like default, that's assumed. Like in the traditions and the Quran and Hadith, I'm not a scholar, but it appears to be assumed that people are from a people, from a nation or a qabila tribe, and that prophets were sent to their nation. I mean, even the most, I guess you could say the most social constructivist academics or whatever that are in the field of linguistics understand the necessity of specifying linguistic changes or languages or categorizing languages, right? Now, they may deny that on a biological level. I'm not very well versed in the social constructivist stuff. They may deny that on biological levels of gender and whatnot, but specificity is required. And so when I was just yesterday, I was talking to a Somali brother about this, and he said, this is common sense. You have to be specific to your people. It's the most efficient. You know how they speak, you know how they were raised, and it's even better if you're from the same geographical region or the same descent, a line of descent. It makes even more sense. But you have to be specific. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was very specific. He was very specific about who he spoke to. He modified his language to speak the different in terms of dialects and how he spoke Arabic he modified it according to who he was speaking to. And he took into consideration the social standing, the lore, the history, the genealogy of the individuals or groups he was talking to. So this stuff is very common sense, but it sucks that we have to even explain it. But the bottom line is to get down to the work, to get down to it, to do that networking. Because right now, it's a very interesting time right now. It's very open. Like we don't have a physical infrastructure. We don't have anything developed. So everything is like based on the word and character and personal relationships. It's very decentralized. And so that makes it kind of exciting, kind of fun. Like we're in a very special time right now. And if we do it properly, it can expand into actual infrastructure, actual buildings, brick and mortar, physical communities, villages, these kinds of things. But yeah, that's my take.
Yeah, all really good points. I mean, it's just a matter of time before people see the utility in this, and I think, the common narrative has kind of been built up by what the Muslim community sees as success when it comes to spreading Islam in the Anglosphere. And really, the only metric that they use is how many shahadas do we get, the number of shahadas in a month, that a particular dawah booth or mosque gets, or the number of, converts they see at Jummah prayer. These are basically their metrics, right? Which, are really false metrics. I mean, when I hate to use the comparison, but Moneyball is a perfect example of this. For the longest time, before they had sabermetrics, the only measure of success was, the 5 tools of up and coming baseball players, hitting with power, running, and whatever, which, never wasn't even used in when they analyzed it from a computer standpoint. And I think a lot of that stems from the fact that, many of these Islamic leaders who are mostly from born Muslim backgrounds, but even converts themselves, they will only be concentrating on the action phase of people taking their shahada and not looking at all the stuff that happens beforehand, what prevents converts, Westerners, from looking into Islam or converting to Islam in the first place. And what happens after the shahada, which is all the societal problems that they have to deal with. Those are just kind of pushed off to the side, in favor of this kind of the action approach. And then, once they do convert to Islam, they use this kind of, like you said, the Madinah solution, where it's like, let's just put all of our resources into assimilating the convert, which is totally unsustainable. And, if they can't just keep pouring money into this, have it keep not working, and then they just throw their hands up in the air and say, what else do we need to do? Because I've explained this model, this very simple model that, that Kris has stated, just should be common sense to the common Muslim. To convert very famous converts who have been Muslim for years, who have, quote unquote, made it, who have become like these celebrity imams, who have, done their ijazah, who have done years of research. And they look at me like I have 3 heads. Like, what are you talking about? This is going to divide the Ummah. This is going to turn into a cult. And they just can't wrap their head around it. And maybe it comes from the idea that, they're trying, it comes off as racist because, they're thinking, okay, they're thinking that born Muslims in the West don't belong, that they're somehow less qualified to give dawah to the converts in these families. That's not what we're talking about here. An imam, maybe he may be able to give a 20, 30-minute conversation to a convert's family member if they're willing. Most of the time they're not. And most of the time the convert doesn't want to exclaim their Islam publicly. And most of the time they want to meet at a mosque, which converts families aren't willing to do. But even if they, get around to having this 20, 30-minute conversation, that's just one 20-minute 30-minute conversation with an imam. Whereas the converts' families are being inundated with misinformation about Islam 24/7 after and before that conversation. So I don't understand how the traditional mosques are going to address this problem with the model that they're currently using. Abdullah?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, really think about it. Like let's say for an instance that you're a white convert who accepts Islam, and then after many years you decide to completely forgo your culture, your history, and everything, and you become, let's say, the model Muslim in the eyes, let's say the specific mosque that wants you to join not just Islam, but their culture and their identity. What utility are you going to serve to give dawah to see other white people who are like you, with by face and by nature, but you've completely like become deracinated from your own culture, that you're unable to relate to them in any sort of meaningful way. Like I remember you had a discussion with Brother Ismail Kamdar from I think Institute like a really long time ago, and you spoke about, and he brought up this example about how he knew a guy who was a convert to Islam who was from a Zulu tribe, and then the person that went to give dawah to the Zulu tribe was him, because he's from that culture. He knows like their different mental models and their framework, and how he can best persuade them in order to bring them to Islam. So Kris, you have any identical examples?
Well, at the top of my head, I mean, Islamic history is filled with it. I mean, it would have happened on a constant basis. I mean, people followed the religion of their chief, so it was a very collective process. I mean, Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, may Allah be pleased with him. I mean, he was a chieftain of Aus, and he converted by basically telling his people, "I won't speak to any of you until you accept Islam," and they all accepted Islam collectively. That was the structure of the world then, and largely it's the same way now. I mean, people follow who they look up to. Nowadays it's degenerate, like it's celebrities and musicians and actors, but it's natural for human beings to follow figureheads and to collectively act together in that following of that trend or that decision, right? It's a very organic process. And the thing with the Madinah model is that part of what makes it so profound in its original emergence is that the people are separate in their orientation and their what tribe they belong to. What makes it profound is the fact that they are distinct, right? That is what's profound about that unification. If they were all the same, it wouldn't have the same meaning, right? But when they all marched on Mecca to take Mecca at the end, they all had their tribal flags, right? But that was how profound it was, as they were all moving as thousands of people to retake the Kaaba, right? But it was under the banner of Islam. So if you don't have that differentiation, then that unity under the banner of faith, of Tawheed, is doesn't have the same meaning as it did when people read the Sirah, they read the Hadith, and they read about these inner rivalries and histories of conflict between people uniting. As the Aus and Khazraj is the prime example of that. They were at each other's throats for generations before Islam. But that differentiation under Islam adds to the beauty and the overall mosaic or the body of the Ummah. I'm just reiterating what I said before, but I just thought I'd articulate that.
Yeah, and also just an example from me personally is that I had a post on my Substack a while ago, which is basically a Q&A I had between like a Muslim brother who's anonymous. I have no idea who he is, but he's a white convert to Islam. He had a few questions for me based off a lot of my previous posts and about the realities of American Muslim life. And one of the things he asks was basically, what's the Islamic stance? And say he used the word eugenics, but I'm sure he meant it in a much more friendly way. And I said, we don't have racial segregation in Islam, or in terms of marriage and stuff like that, and procreation and stuff like that. However, and then I brought this up in the article, was that we have a certain reality today that like the vast majority of interracial marriages, and especially between, let's say, a convert to Islam and someone who's a Muslim from an entirely different culture, very often they fail. And they fail because both sides did not take into account a lot of things that, we're talking about, in this podcast, in which we've been talking about for like years now. And it's like, when you look back at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there were plenty of interracial marriages, for example. Obviously, it's halal. There's no exceptions that suddenly make it haram. But this was a time when these people, these Sahabis, were able to transcend their tribal animosities, and it was very easy for example, the woman Sahabi, I forgot her name. She's Abyssinian, and the Prophet ﷺ married her to an Arab. And this was a very easy thing, and they did it without second thought. This was not a problem for them. But these were people whose iman was so strong that they were able to transcend those animosities and allegiances.
Still, yeah, no, still though. I mean, they were still living within the same general locale.
Yeah,
so
but still, and I was going to bring this up, but they were still not only united by, the city and the place that they were in, but they were also united by Islam, and that was their primary mode of identification. But today we don't have that luxury. We don't have that same ability as they did to be like, oh yeah, I'm not going to enforce anything from my race whatsoever. But no, we have what we've been talking about for the past hour and a half, which is that you have certain Muslims who are like, oh yeah, I'm going to just enforce and propagate my culture and my identity and my my views, but meanwhile, I'm going to suppress yours because I don't think yours should be the one that flourishes at the moment.
The problem with this is, Abdullah, is that we have very little data on the subject, and even if we were to do a study on it, there's going to be several biases if we do that kind of research.
Yeah. It's right now. This is something that's very anecdotal, which for a lot of people, which it's not just anecdotal to me, but anecdotal from like it's like a group anecdotal thing. But other than that, yeah, and after I wrote this article, there was a Salafi brother who, I mean, of course, he had the best intentions, and he brought me a lot of evidences and so on and so forth. And basically, it's like he had the same problem that I saw with so many others, that you're not acknowledged. It's like you're technically correct with like the theology of it. It's absolutely halal to have for example, interracial marriages and so on and so forth, and this kind of mixing, but it's just not. And what I'm saying isn't that you shouldn't do it. Obviously, if you're a convert who finds himself very in love with and very compatible, this is the main thing, compatibility with another born Muslim, absolutely go for it. What I'm saying is that you need to have a second perspective of it, based off the reality that we're living in today. That you're actually, and that and you've been advocating for this, that you're actually much more likely to be compatible, say, if you're a white convert, with another white convert sister, for example.
Well, the thing is, that option isn't available. That's what people don't understand.
Yeah, it's also very tough.
If you're an Arab Christian, for example, who converts to Islam, which is very difficult, what they go through is extremely difficult. I mean, there's a lot of Islamophobia among Arab Christians, but at least when you convert to Islam, you have literally millions of people from the same culture that you could marry into. So the marriage pool is immediately there for you. Same thing with Hindu converts to Islam. There's literally millions of Desi brothers and sisters that have a similar culture than you do. But if you're a white convert to Islam, there's nothing. I mean, you have no marriage pool, basically no one with the same culture, and it's difficult to meet just another white convert of the same gender, let alone white convert of another gender. And then on top of that, you have the fact that you're dealing with not one, but two sets of non-Muslim families. And this is a talking point that Muslim da'is don't even recognize and bring up when they talk to ethno-nationalists. Like, this is a perfect point that Daniel could have brought up to when he debated Mark Collette. He could have said, look, the more white Britain hates on Islam, the worse it is for your demographic situation, because the white British who are interested in Islam and do convert to Islam, they get kicked out of their families' homes, they get written out of the wills, and then they have no choice but to marry into a Muslim family, because what white convert is going to want to marry another white convert and have to deal with two sets of Islamophobic families?
Yeah, and that's a big problem that Islam for Europeans is aiming to solve, right?
Yeah, or just bring it up. I mean, like,
or bring it into the big conversation so it can more easily be solved, and in the very far future.
And I hate to say him by name. I mean, I'm not here to backbite him. I mean, when I made my advice video to him, I tagged him and say, listen to this. It's my sincere advice.
Yeah, there's Daniel does a lot of great work, and I admire Daniel because, well, first of all, he brought up loads of non-PC topics that the Muslim community just wasn't willing to talk about, and he brought them to light. And he's been largely responsible for that up until, I think, when he got banned from Twitter. But and obviously still posting on his website and on his YouTube channel. But he was like one of the original guys. But we have our disagreements with them, and you have yours.
I'll just leave it at that. But we're trying. He does his own thing. I do mine. But again, no, we'll leave it at that. I mean, in general, I would say, like you said, there's nothing wrong with interracial marriage. But my interview with Brother Ismail and other Islamic scholars said the same thing. That but a lot of people don't realize is that it was the exception and not the rule. For the most
Yeah.
part, you had kafah. 3 of the 4 madhabs, they advocate for the kafah system, and that all these factors should be taken into account. And what is mustahab or recommended is to marry your cultural match.
Mhm.
But that isn't even an option, and that's why a lot of Westerners don't convert to Islam in the first place, because like you said, the institutions are there, including marriage networking. So
I mean,
Yep.
even in the event of it being permissible to marry another race, I don't have stats, but the common anecdotal situation is that most people simply marry within. I mean, even within being permissible, legal, even in multicultural places, most people simply marry within. It's going to happen
Mhm.
for the majority of the time. So, just how it is.
one more topic, this is kind of on the controversial side, but we shouldn't have nothing should be controversial on our end. Is that I guess in these discussions, with the European right, you get into some pretty controversial things. And I had my conversation with Duvid a couple of months ago, and I think that even among the Bani Israel, I mean, there is, this would be a win. Islam for Europeans model be a win even for them, because uh, we are Muslims and we strictly follow the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And at the end of the day, they are the people of the book. And I had Jewish friends at university who didn't have, either the extreme leftist opinions of being incredibly anti-white or extreme, pro-Israel opinions. They all have their own nuances, even among themselves. So, I mean, but when you get into these discussions with the European right, especially with these kind of trolls on Twitter, they say stuff that will seriously get you banned. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I think they would prefer to deal with us than the people on the European right. So, I don't know. Should we just avoid that topic altogether, or do you think that it's just inevitable that it's going to come up? Like, I wanted to get a discussion going with Nuturi Carta, because I think at the end of the day, like our religions are very closely related, but I think that there are always going to be those who are going to be opposed to it, and I guess we have to stick to our principles. So, do you guys have anything to add to that without getting yourselves banned yourselves?
Yeah. Oh, Chris, you want to go first? Okay. Yeah. My position on dialogue with the European right has been pretty much the same for quite a while now, which is that I am willing to work with whoever is willing to work with us to basically fight against the kind of mainstream narratives that hurt both of our groups. Because there's a mutual allyship there, and I think that's very valuable. Obviously, there are huge segments of the European right that have want nothing to do with Muslims or Islam or anything Oriental by any metric or mean, which I'm completely fine with that. I'm not going to scream Islamophobia if I want to have a dialogue with a certain big right-wing figure, and then they just bash me into or think that I don't want anything to do with you. I don't care about that. I'm just willing to have a dialogue with anyone who's willing to provide a second perspective that will supplement ours, because I think a lot of the problems that a lot of Western Muslims face is because we went our own way, and we just continuously developed all of these errors, which just piled on and just compiled the big issues that we have today. So and I actually veer onto the side of actually associating with those who, even though they might not like Islam deep down, we just sort of mutual respect. It's a certain kind of Salahuddin versus King Richard kind of thing, where it's like obviously there's no violence or a violence or animosity that is like the dishonorable kind of absolute hatred with no intellectual thought behind it whatsoever. But we're willing to acknowledge certain facts about each other, and how there's a big meme on the right for quite a while, which is Islam is right about women, which I'm not going to get deep into that for obvious reasons. I'm not going to derail your show like that, but it just shows that there's a lot of aspects of Islam that the European right respects, and there's a lot of aspects about the European right which Islam respects, and that doesn't require either of us to defile our cultures or our religions, but we still need to find that middle ground where we can come and have a dialogue and be able to find what helps both of us the most. And I don't mean that in a kind of like diversity, inclusion type of way, but rather we must have this allyship in the moment, in the time that we're in, because it's very valuable. And if we don't, then I think we're going to be losing out on a lot.
So my take is that the Muslim worldview is firstly and primarily theological, theocentric, so to speak. So say, whereas a nationalist wants to preserve the race, not only do we want to preserve the race, we want salvation for the race. And we want the race to worship the correct way and to worship their Lord. So there's a different context there. And there's a degree to where a non-believer can never understand that motivation. And they never will unless they accept Islam. So if we do become a sizable group, which inshallah we do eventually, I wouldn't be surprised if there's people on the right who are supportive of it and people on the right who despise it, see it as traitorous or something, like you're worshiping a foreign god or something like that. But as so long as we stick to the salvation of our people, Tawheed, the goal is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's all we focus on. The other material dimensions, increased birth rate, bigger extended families, tribal units of white people, again, that's secondary, and that will come with it. But the first is a Tawheed. So on that basis, because a lot of nationalists are materialists, they're Nietzschean kind of materialist people, at the end of the day, they won't relate to that or understand it. However, even among those people, those very materialist people, they can admire the metaphysical motivation of people. Even Bronze Age pervert, I heard a clip of him recently where he's talking he even mentioned Musa, Moses, and other figures about how they brought the zeal of God or the gods, a metaphysical motivation that put the social element second, but empowered and strengthened the social element, made them more fanatical, if you will. And he himself said that viewing religion as just social utility is bleak, and it really is. And so believers believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They want to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They want to see the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is the motivation. And so if you are focused on that first and foremost, all of these social, genetic, biological, whatever things come into play, they fall into place, inshallah. And because it's an organic worldview, because Tawheed is the fitrah, it's natural, just by default, the social organization around that will be organic and normative, like normal for human history. Right?
There was a story from the seerah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in the Meccan phase, where he was giving da'wah to various groups during Hajj season, and it was for the most part unsuccessful, except for the small tribe of Aus, which Khazraj, I think, which precipitated the hijrah to Medina. But he gave da'wah to I think a Persian leader, not the leader, but one of the leaders of Fars. Right. And he said that if you convert to Islam, you will rule over Persia. And he couldn't believe it. So he ended up not embracing Islam. And as we know, after the Fath Mecca, the conquest of Mecca, Islam spread to Persia in great numbers, and it ended up becoming the dominant religion of the society. That person actually ended up converting to Islam himself, but he never became a leader of Persia. So he must have regretted that.
And some of the fiercest Muslims, the most powerful Muslims, Muslim leaders, were staunch enemies prior. Yeah. I mean, that's universal. Mm-hmm. The Persians, the Roman Arabs, the Turks, they were staunchly fighting the Muslims. They were savage, right? Mm-hmm. But and those people ended up becoming the torchbearers of the Deen, mm-hmm. right? So the fact that, oh, how can you convert Europe when Europe has been at war with Islam for how long? That's even more powerful. That's even more, that adds to it. Mm-hmm. That makes it more profound. Mm-hmm. So alhamdulillah, if a staunch anti-Muslim European converts, I have no doubt in my mind he'd be among some of the most passionate and zealous converts. That's just kind of how it goes.
Yeah. One last thing before we go. The last thing we want to do, and I, as a friend from Islam for Europeans, I have to walk a very fine line, and I never want to throw any of my Muslim brothers and sisters under the bus. because there's so much stigma around this idea of us collectivizing. The way I look at, the crisis in Europe of Muslims, going there en masse, refugees, I look at it as like a humanitarian issue. And, there are several factors at play. One is that well, first of all, there's a lot of Muslim refugees in Muslim countries. So Turkey, Jordan, and they're really living on shoestring budgets. Like I was watching videos of Muslims living in refugee camps in Turkey, and it's very difficult for them to live there. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, aid them in those countries. The amount of funding that it takes, for one refugee in England, you could take that money and literally help an entire refugee camp, hundreds of Muslims, there's other metrics as well for, a lot of, sadly, some refugees have died en route to Europe, across the Mediterranean. And on top of that, it's a very difficult situation for them. And I mean, this is precipitated by, the destabilization of the Muslim world. And I think many people on the European right, they recognize that. Others don't care, but at least there's a segment that agrees that this is a crisis that needs to be. The best solution is the humanitarian approach, and if we at the end of the day, Allah Subhanahu wa Taala is going to question the Muslim Ummah about this, and I think the approach that Muslim organizations should take is to look at the data dispassionately and come to their own conclusions, because you can't just take a position on these political issues and just take the exact opposite approach just because your enemies are taking the other approach. That's just not going to work. I mean, you just can't say, oh, I'm pro-abortion because people on the and the right wingers in America are anti-abortion. So I mean, I think when it comes to a hot button issue like this, I mean, again, I think as we move forward, like Kris said, Islam for Europeans should be apolitical. And I agree with that because, we have enough on our plate already. We're just trying to survive as converts. But my sincere recommendation to born Muslim communities and their organizations is to look at this data dispassionately and come to your own conclusions. Do you have anything to add to that, guys, or Abdullah?
Not really. You summed it up quite well. You're muted.
That's all I wanted to say about that. So I think this was really productive. Thank you so much for coming on, Kris, Abdullah. This was really a great thing. I know we talked about a lot of these things, when we were chatting, on social media as well, but it's good to really flesh them out and get them out to the public because, it's really important things that we need to know. I definitely, Abdullah, could you point out that book again, just so, we can recommend it?
It's called The Big Step by Mehdi Locke. How to Survive Islam in the Anglosphere. It's a very short book, very straight to the point. I absolutely recommend it, not just to anyone who is converting to Islam or has converted to Islam, but really any Western Muslim who, even if you're a born Muslim, this is an extremely valuable book. And it really shatters a lot of, myths and really not only that, but he actually goes over the history of how a lot of the Western Muslims are found themselves in the problems they are in today. With regards, not just the mainstream narratives, but, a lot of media manipulation, things like that. Yeah.
I'd love to have him on one day. Okay. Did you guys, Kris, Abdullah, did you have any, do you have like anything you'd like to promote, like a Twitter, like a handle, or you just want to leave it at that?
Yeah, sure. I write every day on Twitter and occasionally on my Substack. You can find me on Twitter at Abdullah Yusuf, just one word, and basically how my name is written, but instead of a B, it's a V. And I have a novel coming out in June. Actually, it's a science fiction novel with Muslim/Islamic themes, which I'm very excited about, which has been my main project for the past 3 years now. And if anyone watching is interested in that, then I'm excited to show you what I have.
That sounds great. Yeah. Is the title to be announced, or?
It's called Blood of the Levant. It's going to be out I'm aiming to release it on Father's Day because that's also somewhat related, but yeah, hopefully then.
Okay, may Allah give you success in that endeavor, Abdullah. Kris, anything you'd like to promote, or just giving your 2 cents here?
Oh yeah, I just started a new page, an affiliate page to Islam for Europeans. It's called White Muslim Unity. That's the @ is WM_nation. So check that out. It's a new profile. Just started posting recently, so that's all.
Okay, great. Okay, I guess we'll wrap it up. Thank you so much for listening to us. I'm Robert from Islam for Europeans. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala keep all the Muslims safe and successful, both all around the world, the Muslim world and the West as well. And yeah, thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum, guys, and take care. Have a great day.